How's it going, you guys? So in this video, I'm going to be clearing up a lot of the questions I've been getting about my sodium recommendations. Because a lot of people have been feeling like, the amount of salt that I recommend, especially for people dealing with salt deficiency symptoms, tend to be outlandish, and people are scared that they're going to die of like hypertension or something if they take a teaspoon of salt, which is definitely not the case. However, if you have kidney problems, if you have diabetes or heart failure, or if you're on any kind of medications, especially diuretics, you definitely should be very careful with this, with salt, and not listen to the shit that I'm talking about here, because it does not apply directly to you. You are the very rare people that might possibly have a problem with high salt intake. But for all other people that don't have those factors involved, you shouldn't really worry. So at a baseline, the human kidney can generally excrete approximately 2 grams of sodium per 5 minutes. And what that means is you could safely consume about 1 teaspoon of regular table salt every 5 minutes and not be tremendously affected. The next thing you got to understand is that there is a minimum amount of sodium that human beings require to be healthy. And most experts agree that that's somewhere around 3 grams of sodium per day on average. So, something everyone must consider is typically when you eat a diet that's high in processed foods, you're going to be getting a lot of sodium with every single meal. Typically, the typical processed meal, and I'm just going to estimate here, typically contains anywhere from 2 to 4 grams of sodium per meal. And that can include anything from fast food. That could be like some like ramen noodles, obviously. That can be frozen meals, because the sodium is used to preserve the food. Lots and lots of different processed foods contain a large amount of sodium. And those foods are not bad necessarily because of the sodium, but more so because of the refined oils and refined fats that are found in them. But most people who consume a whole food diet, they don't get any sodium whatsoever except for the sodium that they add to their diet. Typically, most fresh meat contains like maybe 200 milligrams per pound of meat. That's so small. Also, whole grains, vegetables, fruits, they don't even contain 10 milligrams per serving of sodium. So when you eat a whole food diet, you're going to be like finding it impossible to get anywhere close to even 1 gram of sodium per day. It's very hard with whole foods. And again, there is a minimum recommended amount of sodium that humans should get, and it's seen to be around 3 grams. Now, when you look at the meta-analysis and the totality of evidence surrounding sodium intake, what you find is there's a bell-shaped curve. So what you find is people who eat under 3 grams of sodium per day tend to have greater mortality risk, whereas people who consume over 7 grams per day also see the same rise in mortality risk. But people who eat 3 to 7 grams per day, according to this data, tend to have a very low mortality risk, or normal lifespan, healthy lifespan. And so there is nuance to this discussion. The next thing you have to understand is that the reason why sodium is an essential nutrient is because sodium regulates blood volume. So if you have a low sodium and you're not consuming enough sodium in your body, so first of all, it's very common for people to have symptoms of hyponatremia, which is low blood sodium, but it doesn't actually show up on a blood scan. So somebody gets their blood taken at the doctor's and their sodium's within what they call like normal range or healthy range, and yet they have all the same symptoms of hyponatremia: dizziness, cramps, headaches, brain fog, lethargy and malaise, meaning you just feel like crap and you don't know why, you can't really explain it. You feel low energy. You might feel anxious tension because the muscles can't relax. And you might be peeing excessively, you might be excessively thirsty, your pee's probably clear, usually. And doctors say, oh, well, your sodium's in normal range, so you don't need to worry about that. But the fact is, people still experience these problems, and then when they consume the 1 teaspoon that's recommended, Well, more like 2 to 3 teaspoons per day for if you really want to be healthy and feel good. All those symptoms go away. And so one reason is because of blood volume, because it regulates blood volume. If you have low blood volume, you're going to have less circulation throughout the body. And that means less heart function, possibly low blood pressure, and a wide variety of other problems. Like adequate sodium is required for circulation. And that's why a lot of people might have problems breathing, is because your circulation is low. And I had this problem for a long time. Another thing is that sodium regulates the contraction of muscles. Well, your heart is a muscle, and your diaphragm is a muscle. And so without adequate sodium, you'll have weaker contractions, which can translate to less breathing due to weaker contractions of the diaphragm and the heart muscle. And so reducing sodium for the sake of heart health might actually be contradictory strategy. Another thing is your adrenal glands require a large amount of sodium in order to regulate things like aldosterone and cortisol. And all of those things are heavily connected, and that's a very long and deep topic to get into. But essentially, if you're lacking sodium, your cortisol is going to be all out of whack, which means your adrenal glands will be, or your adrenaline will be all out of whack, which means your dopamine will also be out of whack, which means you're going to have all the symptoms of what they call adrenal fatigue. You're going to have anxiety, panic attacks, and all sorts of problems. Now, when you consume adequate amounts of sodium, your body is able to relax because you're giving the adrenal glands the amount of sodium that it needs, and you're giving your body hydration and allowing the circulatory system to kind of sort itself out. And typically within the first 10 minutes after taking a teaspoon of salt, people will generally feel normal again, and they'll be surprised, like, wow, why have I been avoiding sodium all this time? And they'll be surprised that such a simple fix like a teaspoon of salt actually made such a big difference. It's crazy, right? Well, that's because you had a nutrient deficiency all along. So another thing to take into consideration is the fact that sodium is a main mineral required for retaining not only water, but also water-soluble nutrients. So without adequate amounts of sodium, you're going to also have symptoms of potassium deficiency, symptoms of magnesium deficiency, symptoms of dehydration, because you need the sodium in order to retain that water. And you're also going to possibly have symptoms of B vitamin deficiency and vitamin C deficiency. Again, why is that? Because sodium regulates the retention of water, and without retaining water, what's going to happen to water-soluble nutrients? They're not going to be effectively retained. And how's that going to manifest? Deficiency symptoms of all of these nutrients. So, if I'm not mistaken, Dr. James D. Nicolantonio kind of started to get into a lot of this in his book, The Salt Fix. Although I don't think he went as in depth with all these nutrients, but I might be wrong. But you should definitely read that book if you're wondering even more about all of these things, and that should really help you understand where I'm coming from with this. So yeah, it's not enough to just get enough magnesium. It's not enough to just get enough potassium. None of that's going to matter if you don't get enough salt. And in whole food diets, people don't get enough salt. And even cheating and eating some processed foods every now and then is not going to give you enough salt. And it's vitally important you get enough salt. So as I'm walking out here in nature, a lot of people are probably going to wonder, well, damn, why is salt so important if human beings never had access to salt in nature? Well, the fact is, human beings have actually eaten salt for millions of years, and most animals out in the wild actively seek out salt. So there's a variety of different sources that most people don't know about, because most people live in modern society where if you want salt, you just go to the grocery store and get it. So where did ancient hunter-gatherers get their sodium from? Variety of sources. The main source that is generally agreed upon is tribes would generally distribute about 500 milliliters of animal blood per kill when they would actually be able to catch an animal and kill it. So 500 milliliters of blood would typically equate to about 1 to 2 grams of sodium. And so that should be enough for them to survive per day, if they could get that every day, which they probably didn't. So blood is one major source, and that's probably also a major source of vitamin C, just to throw that out there, and many other nutrients as well, and glucose probably as well. So blood is one source. What's another source? Salt water. So it's generally agreed that a large amount of hunter-gatherers lived around seawater. Now, not all of them, but a lot of them. And obviously seawater contains a lot of salt. And so they might not just consume it right out of the ocean, but they would dilute it with other water and other things. Now, I don't remember exactly how they treated the salt water in order to get the sodium from it, but salt water was another source. And also, if they're eating fish from the sea, that fish would also contain a large amount of salt from the salt water. And generally speaking, seafood is very high in salt. So you have the salt water, you have the blood, and then also there's actually been researchers that would follow hunter-gatherers and live a day in the life with them, and they'd actually find that hunter-gatherers would look for animals that are seeking out salt, and they have their own ways of measuring that type of behavior to identify those salt-seeking animals, and they would follow those animals to the salt lick, and they would go and then they would eat the salt and probably kill the animal too. And you can find a lot of different videos of animals going through great lengths to get salt. I think it was an antelope or a goat or something, where the goat or whatever it was jumped up like a mountain to go and lick salt at the top, a salt rock at the top. So, and then of course human beings used to eat a large amount of animal life as well. Insects and amphibians and things like frogs and snakes, which, these days we don't even want to believe that because we think they're so disgusting because we've been socially conditioned. I mean, think about how easy it would be to get food if we just waited for a mosquito to land on us and we ate it. Right? Think about how annoying mosquitoes are when they suck our blood. Well, imagine what would happen if you just ate those mosquitoes instead. Now they're not annoying. Now they're a source of food that prevents you from dying, right? Anyway, not that I'm promoting that. It's a good way to get hepatitis. But it's possible that we got sodium from some of these more exotic forms of nourishment as well. Then we also have the theory that a lot of people push that human beings might have actually gotten their sodium from soil. Now I don't know about that. Now I do know that soil is a large source of minerals in general. Mostly things like magnesium, nitrate, and I'm not a soil expert or anything, but definitely that could be a large source as well. So, the list could go on and on and on, but though I think that I gave a pretty good list so far of possible sodium sources in the human diet over the last million years. I'm sure many people will go down in the comments and give me a couple others, which is great. So, with that being said, if you're suffering from things like shortness of breath or crippling anxiety and panic attacks, and nothing helps, and you feel like it's a physical problem, but you can't, your doctors say everything's okay and blah, 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 it's very possible that you could be suffering from a sodium deficiency. And if you have any of those other symptoms that I mentioned before, dizziness, cramps, lethargy, malaise, panic attacks, shortness of breath, let's see, the list goes on, brain fog, etc. It's very possible that you're lacking salt, especially if you start to notice these symptoms around the time when you start to eat healthy. And I actually made a whole video on many reasons why people feel like crap when they switch to a whole food diet from a junk food diet. And this is one of them. The other reason is that you could be suffering from an allergy or a food intolerance. And if you're stuffing yourself with fiber, you might not be able to breathe because your damn diaphragm is being cramped by all that undigestible plant matter in your colon. So rule out food intolerances with elimination diet. Try reducing fiber, you know, and get enough salt, and you'll probably feel a lot better. So leave your question. Oh, and also get adequate animal protein. I would recommend that. But leave your question and comments down below. Get enough salt, and I'll talk to y'all next time.